The first light of dawn crept over the jagged mountains of New Guinea like a thin blade of gold, cutting through the mist that clung to the jungle floor. The air was already heavy with heat, sweat, and the smell of damp earth. Mosquitoes drifted around the pierced metal planking of the rough airstrip, buzzing in lazy spirals. And then, in the distance, a different sound rose above the morning chorus, a deep rumble, a twin-throated growl that grew louder with every heartbeat. The P38 Lightning was waking up. Crew chiefs called out orders, their voices echoing across the field. Mechanics ran between the aircraft, tightening bolts, topping fuel, wiping the condensation from the smooth metal skin of the twin booms. The air shimmered above the exhausts of the Allison V-1710 engines as they coughed, sputtered, then roared to life one by one. The vibration rippled through the ground, shaking the tools inside open crates. Pilots walked toward their aircraft in the pale morning light, helmets hanging from one hand, parachute straps clinking softly at their sides. They were young but worn, faces darkened by sun and exhaustion. In their eyes lay the weight of another day that would stretch from sunrise to sunset. They knew one truth better than anyone else on the island. The Lightning did not rest, and neither did the men who flew it. At first glance, the P-38 looked strange to newcomers. 2 long fuselage booms, 2 engines, a central pod for the pilot, a shape unlike anything the Pacific had seen before. Some pilots whispered that it looked like a machine built by accident, something too unusual to trust. But once a man sat inside that cockpit, felt the twin engines rumble, and pushed the throttle forward, all doubt vanished. The Lightning did not lift off the ground. It tore itself free from it. As the first P-38 rolled onto the runway that morning, the sun finally rose above the ridge, painting the aircraft in orange light. The pilot shoved the throttles forward. Dust exploded behind the wheels. The twin engines roared in perfect unison, sending the aircraft racing down the rough runway faster than any single-engine plane on the base. When the P-38 left the ground, the moment felt almost effortless. The twin booms sliced through the air, the wings leveled. The Lightning climbed toward the sky with the smoothness of a predator waking to find the horizon unguarded. To the men on the ground, it was a sight they never grew tired of. To the Japanese, it was something worse. In the early months of the Pacific War, the Japanese Zero dominated the skies. Agile, lightweight, deadly in a turning fight, it ruled low-altitude combat and shredded American aircraft that dared to enter its airspace. But the P-38 changed that equation the moment it arrived. It was faster in a dive, faster in a climb, faster in level flight at high altitude, and most important of all, it could fly farther than any fighter the Americans had brought to the Pacific. That mattered in New Guinea, where the jungle swallowed everything, and distances between airfields were measured not in miles, but in hours of fuel burned. The Lightning had fuel, plenty of it, enough to fly deep into enemy territory, escort bombers across seas and mountains, then return with fuel to spare, enough to chase Japanese fighters long after they had to turn back, enough to stay in the air from sunrise to late afternoon and still have the range to conduct one more mission before dusk. That was why the Japanese gave it a name, the Two-Fisted Devil. In the early morning hours, the P-38 served its first role of the day, the high-altitude guardian. As the morning sun warmed the jungle canopy, Lightning patrols climbed into the brightening sky, engines humming at perfect throttle settings, and pilots scanning for the glint of enemy aircraft rising from Rabaul or Leh. At altitude, the Lightning felt like an extension of the pilot himself. Its central gun placement meant every weapon fired straight ahead, with surgical accuracy. No convergence issues, no guessing ranges, just 4.5 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon blazing directly toward the enemy. When a pilot fired, the cockpit shook and the sky ahead lit up with streaks of white smoke and bright orange muzzle flashes. Japanese Zeros tried to turn with it, tried to pull it into spirals, tried to drag it into tight horizontal fights. The P-38 refused. It did not fight the way they wanted. It fought its own way. It climbed straight, dove hard, hit fast, struck once, and disappeared. A boom and zoom machine in a world where the Zero depended on slow, graceful, energy-bleeding maneuvers. The Lightning was brutally efficient, not elegant. It killed with speed, not showmanship. And in the early morning hours, that was exactly what the Americans needed. Every day began with the same pattern: patrol, engage, clear the sky, escort the bombers. Then land, refuel, reload, and prepare for the next task. Because the Lightning never stopped with just one job. Even as the morning dogfights ended and Japanese fighters retreated into the haze, the P-38s returned to the airfield only long enough to be refueled and rearmed. Crew chiefs worked like demons, hands moving so fast they blurred. Pilots drank a mouthful of warm water, wiped sweat and grease from their faces, and climbed right back into the cockpit. The sun climbed higher. The day grew hotter. The Lightning kept flying. From the moment dawn touched its wings, the P-38 was in motion, fighting, escorting, watching, learning the air currents, riding the rising thermals off the mountains, circling above the jungle and sea as if the entire Pacific was simply another battlefield it was built to conquer. For a machine made of metal and fuel, it seemed almost alive. By mid-morning, the first phase of the day was complete. The fighter, the guardian, the killer at dawn. But the Lightning was only getting started. Its engines were still warm, its guns still hungry, and a new role just as vital and dangerous awaited it under the full blaze of the midday sun. Because by noon, the P-38 would trade its claws for eyes and become the fastest camera the war had ever known.
By the time the sun climbed fully above the jungle canopy, the air over New Guinea vibrated with heat and tension. The mountains glowed in pale orange light, mist burned off the ridges, and the sea shimmered like a sheet of hammered silver. It was in this rising heat that the P-38 Lightning entered its second duty of the day. Not scouting, not spying, but hunting. Morning was the hour of dogfights, and the Lightning was born for it. The first Japanese formations always came early, timing their flights with the same precision they had used since the opening days of the war. They approached quietly, flying low over the water, then rising sharply to strike at American bombers or cut off patrols. For months, the Zero had dominated these engagements, its light frame and tight turning radius giving it the advantage in close combat. But the pilots of the P-38 did not come to fight on Japanese terms. They came with speed. That morning, the radio crackled in the cockpit of Lieutenant Mark Dalton, a young pilot with 3 victories behind him and a sense that this would be a long day. His squadron was already at altitude, climbing toward the sun as shimmering specks appeared on the horizon. Zeros, at least a dozen. Dalton tightened his grip on the control yoke. The twin booms of the Lightning sliced through the air as the squadron leader gave the order the pilots knew by heart. Stay high, control the energy, do not turn with them. Dalton smiled behind his mask. He had heard those words so many times that he could recite them in his sleep. It was the rule of the Lightning, the rule that saved lives. The Zero could outturn a Lightning every time, but it could never outrun it, outclimb it, or outdive it. And the pilots of the P-38 had learned exactly how to use that truth. The Japanese formations rose toward the bombers with beautiful precision, sunlight glinting off their wings. They expected the usual American response, a head-on pass, maybe a defensive break, then a close-in turning fight. Instead, they looked up and saw the P-38s already above them. The squadron leader pushed his throttle forward. The twin engines roared. The Lightning dropped into a shallow dive, picking up speed with terrifying ease. Dalton followed, his aircraft trembling lightly as it accelerated through 400 miles per hour, then more. The Zeros scattered. Their pilots were skilled, disciplined, veterans of years of combat, but they were not prepared for what the Lightning brought down upon them. Dalton lined up the first target, a Zero climbing in a gentle arc trying to bait the Americans into following. Dalton refused. Instead, he pulled back, climbed slightly, then rolled over the top and dove down behind the Zero. It felt like driving a spear toward the heart of the enemy. At point-blank range, he fired. The nose of the P38 erupted in bright flashes. The .5 caliber guns and the central 20mm cannon fired in perfect alignment. Tracers tore through the morning sky in a tight, deadly line. The Zero disintegrated in a ball of flame, pieces falling toward the jungle canopy below. Dalton pulled up sharply, the G-forces slamming him into his seat. His vision tunneled, darkening at the edges, but the twin engines pulled him back into the climb as if the Lightning itself refused to fall. Another call came through the radio. 2 more Zeros at your low right. Dalton looked down and saw them. The Japanese pilots, maneuvering skillfully, tried to climb and turn, hoping to trap him. But the Lightning was faster. He rolled left, dove straight at them, and watched as both Zeros broke formation. He chose the right one. The dive was steep and brutal. The airframe shuddered. The wind roared so loudly it drowned out the engine noise. But Dalton held his line, waited for the perfect moment, and fired again. The Japanese aircraft exploded into fragments. The second Zero tried to escape in a spiraling dive, banking hard in an attempt to force Dalton into a turning fight, but Dalton did not follow. He pulled up, gathered speed, then dropped again in a perfect boom and zoom attack. This time, the Zero pilot did not survive the burst. Far below, the jungle trembled with distant echoes of cannon fire. Across the sky, other Lightnings fought their own battles. Some slashed through Japanese formations with quick, decisive attacks. Others climbed to pick off enemy fighters that tried to attack from above. The Lightning pilots kept high, kept fast, kept their advantage. They had learned the aircraft's secrets, its strengths, and weaknesses, the way it wanted to move. The P-38 did not dance. It struck. In the distance, a formation of bombers droned steadily toward their target, and the Lightning pilots stayed with them, weaving overhead, never letting the Zeros get close enough to launch their deadly attacks. For months, the Japanese had dominated these skies, but now they found themselves hunted by a machine that refused to play by their rules. A Japanese pilot later wrote in his diary, "They fall on us like hawks. They strike once and vanish. By the time you turn, they are already climbing again." He was describing the P-38. By mid-morning, the air battle was over. Smoke trails drifted across the horizon. The scattered remains of aircraft burned far below. The Lightning Squadron regrouped, climbing back to its escort position. Their fuel gauges were lower. Their throats were dry. Sweat pooled inside their gloves. But their day was only beginning. They had fought for the sky. Soon, they would watch it. Because when the sun reached its highest point, the P-38 changed roles again. The guns cooled, the camera shutters were loaded, the bombs were removed, and the Lightning prepared to become something entirely else. The eye of the entire war. The one machine that could spy on the enemy from heights no attacker could reach. At noon, the fighter became the scout, and the sky became its map.
By midday, the heat over New Guinea rose in shimmering waves, bending the air above the jungle into rippling coils. The morning dogfights had ended, but the work of the Lightning was far from over. In fact, the most important mission of the day was just beginning. While the pilots of other fighters rested, ate, or tried to grab a few minutes of sleep in the shade, the P-38 crews prepared a different beast entirely. The F-5. It looked like a P-38 from a distance. It had the same twin booms, the same long wings, the same sleek central pod. But up close, the differences were unmistakable. The guns were gone. The ammunition boxes removed. In their place were camera ports, carefully sealed, polished, and adjusted with delicate precision. Inside the nose, powerful K-17 and K-22 cameras waited like the eyes of some silent predator. It could not shoot, but it could see everything. This was the Lightning stripped down to its purest purpose: speed, altitude, and endurance.
Lieutenant James Riley slid into the cockpit of his F-5 just as the sun reached its highest point in the sky. He had flown fighters before, firing guns at enemy aircraft, feeling the violent shudder of recoil. But photo recon required a different kind of courage. When you flew an F-5, you were alone. No escort, no guns to return fire, no backup. If the Japanese found you, all you could do was climb, dive, and pray they could not catch you. Riley performed his checks, glanced at the camera switches, and gave a thumbs up to the crew chief. The engines lit with that familiar twin roar, the sound vibrating through his seat. But the feeling was different. The aircraft was lighter now, faster, hungrier. It felt eager to leave the ground. The wheels lifted. The Lightning climbed. Within minutes, he was alone, rising through a sea of bright sunlight, leaving the jungle far below. The air grew thin, the temperature dropped. The sky deepened into a shade of blue that seemed almost unreal. At 30,000 feet, the world was silent. Nothing moved except the faint wisps of cloud brushing against the wingtips. Riley leveled off, trimmed the aircraft, and flipped the first camera switch. The F-5 came alive. Below him stretched the vast landscape of Japanese-occupied territory. Roads curled through the jungle like dusty scars. Rivers wound between mountains. Shorelines shimmered, dotted with supply barges. Behind every ridge lay something the Americans needed to see. Fuel dumps, hidden airstrips, artillery placements, transport columns, and the dark silhouettes of camouflage storage bunkers. The F-5's job was to capture it all. He swept across the coastline, the cameras clicking in steady rhythm, film spooling inside the nose. He passed over a Japanese airfield near Wewak. From above, it looked calm, almost peaceful. But the cameras told another story. Riley leaned the aircraft gently, angling for the perfect shot of aircraft revetments carved into the tree line. Zero fighters parked in the shadows. Fuel drums stacked beside the runway. And most important of all, new anti-aircraft guns hidden beneath palm fronds. He kept flying. He could not linger. Every minute he stayed, the Japanese radar operators below grew more aware of his presence. But they did not sound the alarm, not yet. They assumed he was too high to matter, too far, too fast. But the truth was different. Riley was collecting the information that would shape the entire next week of operations. He banked left, heading inland. Thick jungle stretched beneath him, broken only by muddy tracks carved by Japanese convoys. Smoke rose from a small supply camp. He descended slightly, capturing more images. The cameras clicked without rest. They never slept. Suddenly the radio crackled. Flak firing at Leh. Keep clear. Riley looked ahead. Dark spots appeared across the horizon, then burst into sharp black puffs. Japanese anti-aircraft shells. They knew he was there. He tightened his harness, exhaled slowly, and kept flying straight. At this altitude, any sudden maneuver could stall the aircraft. A shell burst close enough to jolt the Lightning. Splinters peppered the wing. Another detonation rattled the cockpit. But the P-38 held steady. Riley stayed focused. His mission was not to escape yet. It was to finish the run. The cameras clicked again. More photos, more proof, more intelligence. He passed over the final target, a suspected barred staging area hidden among mangroves. The images captured the entire facility. Boats, fuel tanks, communication huts. Enough detail for planners to strike with precision later. Only then did he turn for home. And that was when he saw them. 3 specks rising from the horizon. Zeros. They were coming fast. Riley pushed the throttles forward. The Lightning surged. The twin engines roared. At high altitude, the F-5 came alive with a kind of ferocity he had never felt in a gun-armed P-38. Free of ammunition weight, free of gun mounts, the Lightning accelerated like a creature unleashed. The Zeros climbed desperately, trying to close the distance. Riley stayed calm. He held altitude until the last possible moment, then eased the control yoke forward. The F-5 dropped into a shallow dive. The air screamed past his canopy. The engines howled. The aircraft cut through the sky at speeds the lightweight Japanese fighters could not match.
the distance widened, then widened more. Within seconds, the Zeros were falling behind. Within minutes, they had vanished from view entirely. Riley did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply maintained course, letting the Lightning carry him home in that long, steady glide that had saved so many pilots before him. When he landed, ground crews rushed to unload the film. Intelligence officers gathered, eager and tense, ready to develop the photos that would dictate tomorrow's missions. The pilots knew the truth. One man, one plane, one flight at noon, and an entire front would shift. Because in the midday sun, the P-38 did not fight. It watched. It captured. It remembered. And the war was shaped by what it saw.
By early afternoon, the equatorial sun had reached its harshest point. The sky above New Guinea glowed white with heat. The air shimmered over the runway. The metal skins of grounded aircraft were too hot to touch with bare hands. Even the jungle felt as if it were holding its breath. But for the P-38 Lightning, the day was only at its halfway mark. The morning had been spent fighting. Noon had been spent watching. Now the afternoon would be spent destroying. Ground crews rushed to reconfigure the aircraft as soon as the Recon F-5 Lightnings landed. The camera planes were rolled aside. The gun-armed P-38s were pulled forward again. Bomb racks were mounted, each one clamped into place with loud metallic clicks. Rockets were loaded under the wings, sleek and deadly. The armorers moved with speed and intensity, sweat dripping from their faces as they carried heavy belts of .50 caliber ammunition to refill the nose guns. The Lightning was about to become something new again. A fighter bomber. A ground attacker. A machine built not to chase enemies in the sky, but to break them on the ground. Lieutenant Sam O'Brien wiped his face with a rag and stepped toward his P-38. He had fought in the morning and escorted recon in late morning. Now he was being sent to hit a Japanese supply convoy moving along a narrow road carved through the dense jungle north of Sador. The convoy was reported to have tanks, fuel trucks, and anti-aircraft batteries. It would not be an easy target. But it was exactly the kind of mission the P-38 excelled at. O'Brien climbed the ladder into the cockpit. The smell of oil and warm metal filled his senses. He strapped himself in and tested the controls. The twin propellers began to spin, creating two spiraling storms of dust that whipped across the airfield. The engines settled into their familiar growl, shaking the ground beneath the wheels. He pushed the throttles forward, and the Lightning rolled onto the runway. Bombs hung beneath its wings. Rockets gleamed in the sun. Guns waited in the nose, hungry for the fight. When the P-38 lifted into the air, it felt heavier, but not slower. Its engines dug deeper, pulling the weight of bombs and rockets with determined strength. As O'Brien climbed through thin clouds, he could already feel the subtle shift in how the aircraft handled. It was still the Lightning, but now it was a hammer. The jungle canopy below appeared in great waves of green, broken only by thin brown scars of roads. O'Brien flew low, using the terrain as cover. Sweat ran down his back as the canopy tops almost brushed his wingtips. His heart pounded with every twist and turn. Then he saw it. A column of Japanese vehicles, moving cautiously along a ridgeline road. Trucks, troop carriers, a pair of light tanks, and scattered among them the telltale shapes of anti-aircraft guns. O'Brien called it out over the radio. Convoy in sight. Begin run. He climbed slightly, leveled off, then rolled into the attack. The first dive was swift and vicious. The P-38 plummeted from the sky in a steep, controlled arc. The bombs under his wings whistled as he released them, falling in a deadly curve toward the road. A split second later, two explosions erupted in thick plumes of fire and dirt. Trucks flew apart. Black smoke curled into the sky. O'Brien pulled up hard, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. His vision blurred, darkened, then returned as he leveled off for another pass. The second Lightning in his flight attacked next. Rockets streaked from its wings, leaving white trails that sliced through the air. They slammed into the side of a tank. The vehicle erupted, its turret thrown aside like a toy. Japanese soldiers scattered beneath the canopy, desperately firing rifles and light machine guns upward. Their bullets pattered harmlessly against the underside of the P-38. The twin-boom fighter roared past them like a creature born from thunder. O'Brien circled around again, lining up another run. As he approached, he saw the Japanese anti-aircraft guns swing upward, trying to track him. The gunners fired, sending exploding shells into the air. Black puffs appeared dangerously close to his wings. He stayed steady. At the last second, he dove straight toward the gun pit, pressing the trigger. The nose guns erupted in blinding flashes. Dozens of .50 caliber rounds slammed into the emplacement, tearing it apart in a shower of dirt and debris. The gun stopped firing. The jungle filled with smoke, flames, and the echo of explosions. Trucks burned in the road. Tanks smoldered. Ammunition cooked off in rolling bursts of fire. The surviving Japanese soldiers fled into the trees, abandoning wreckage that had once been a functioning supply convoy. And above it all, the P-38 circled in slow triumph. This was the new face of the Lightning, not just a fighter, not just a scout, but a machine that reshaped the very battlefield. The afternoon sun dipped lower, turning the sky orange as O'Brien and his flight turned back toward base. Their fuel was low, their ammo nearly gone. Smoke trailed faintly from the wings of one aircraft where flak had grazed it. The men were exhausted, their hands shaking from adrenaline. But they had done their job. They had struck hard. They had broken the enemy. They had tilted the balance of the ground war in one brutal, precise attack. As the Lightnings approached the airfield, mechanics ran to guide them in. The moment the engine shut down, steam rose from the exhaust stacks. Ground crews rushed to check for damage, shouting instructions to one another. O'Brien climbed out of the cockpit, legs stiff, face streaked with sweat and grime. Another pilot clapped him on the shoulder. "Big hit out there today." O'Brien nodded. The Lightning does not miss. The two men walked back toward the tents, knowing full well that their day was still not over. The sun had begun to lower, but dusk was not rest. Because the P-38 had one more role to play. And when the afternoon bled into evening, the Lightning would rise again. Not as a fighter, not as a bomber, not as a scout, but as the plane that refused to sleep. The plane that kept watch until darkness covered the jungle and the sea.
The sun dipped low over New Guinea, turning the sky into a swirling canvas of orange, red, and deep purple. The heat of the day faded at last, replaced by a heavy, cooling breeze that rolled down from the mountains. Shadows stretched across the airfield. The jungle began to hum with the sounds of insects waking for the night. Mechanics wiped their hands on oil-stained rags. Pilots loosened the straps on their flight suits. Somewhere far off, artillery rumbled faintly. For most aircraft, evening meant rest. Engines cooled, crews closed their tool chests, pilots unstrapped for the last time. But not the P-38 Lightning. When the other planes slept, the Lightning rose again. As the final colors of daylight shimmered across the sky, another set of orders was posted. Reconnaissance at dusk, patrol at twilight, escort for returning B-25s, shadowing enemy movements, searching for signs of retreat. These missions were no less important than the pitched battles of the morning or the violent strikes of the afternoon. They required quiet discipline, sharp eyes, and the steady nerves that only long experience could provide. Lieutenant Marcus Hale tightened his gloves and approached his P-38, just as the sun touched the horizon. He had flown 2 missions already that day. His back ached, his hands trembled from fatigue, but he knew the truth every Lightning pilot accepted without argument. If the P-38 could fly, then so could he. Crew chiefs moved around the aircraft with practiced rhythm. They checked fuel lines, ran their palms along the twin booms to feel for cracks,
and tightened the panels near the exhausts where the afternoon heat had warped the metal slightly. Hale climbed the ladder and dropped into the cockpit. The seat felt hot, almost burning through his flight suit. He did not complain. He simply strapped in and began his checks. The sky behind him glowed red. The jungle beneath him darkened into a single shadow. Across the field, several other Lightnings prepared for nightfall operations, engines turning, propellers slicing the air. Hale gave the ground crew a thumbs up. Both engines ignited with a twin burst of thunder. The P38 surged forward, lifting into the warm evening air. The fading sunlight reflected off its wings as it rose above the treetops, leaving the airfield behind like a memory. Below him, the jungle stretched into darkness. Ahead, the coastline shimmered with the last light of day. This mission was different from the others. No dogfights, no bombing runs, no racing dives into clouds of flak. This was a search mission, one of the most important yet least celebrated duties of the Lightning. Intelligence reports suggested Japanese units were retreating along hidden forest paths, moving supplies under cover of twilight. Hale was to find them, photograph their routes, mark their positions, and, if the opportunity presented itself, disrupt their movement so ground forces could strike them at dawn. The Lightning leveled out, flying low over the coastline. The air cooled rapidly. The engines hummed in perfect unison, no longer screaming as they did during battle, but speaking in a deep, steady voice. The voice of a machine that refused to rest. Hale scanned the shoreline. He saw faint lights moving along the beach and then disappearing under the canopy. He banked gently, circling wide, watching for patterns. The jungle had grown dark, but the P-38's silhouette still glowed faintly in the orange haze of a dying sun. Suddenly he caught movement below. A convoy. Trucks. A few dozen soldiers. A small command group. They were traveling quietly, trying to reach a hidden bunker before night swallowed them completely. Hale dipped lower, taking a series of long-exposure photos with the cameras mounted in the nose. The shutter clicks echoed faintly through the cockpit. He tilted his aircraft again, lining up the last shot. Then he climbed, turned, and lit his radio. Convoy spotted. Coordinates marked. Returning with film. As he climbed into the last strips of daylight, something caught his eye. Far out at sea, glimmers of light moved in a zigzag pattern. Barges. Japanese supply barges. He exhaled through his mask. Bombers could hit them tomorrow, but only if someone found them now. Hale banked his Lightning again, flying toward the faint shapes. As he drew nearer, he descended to just above wave level. The wind off the ocean smelled like salt and burning fuel from distant wrecks. He flicked the camera switch again. Click, click, click. The film inside the Lightning captured everything. The positions, the direction, the number of vessels, the silhouettes of the men aboard them. A single aircraft. One pass. A shift in an entire campaign. Hale climbed again, turning toward home. Night had fallen completely. The sky above him was black velvet. Only the faintest traces of twilight clung to the horizon. The engines droned with comforting steadiness. He could see the blinking lights of the airfield far in the distance. But he was not alone. 2 B-25 Mitchell bombers had been caught behind schedule and were trying to return before their fuel ran too low. Hale spotted them by accident, their silhouettes barely visible against the dark sea. He angled toward them and flashed his lights twice. They turned to follow him. Escorted twilight. Another role the Lightning knew very well. As they approached the coast, Hale saw something else. 3 Japanese fighters rising from a hidden strip. But the night had come too quickly. They could not see him well enough to engage. Their engines faded into the jungle darkness. The Mitchells made it to the airfield safely. Hale followed moments later, descending toward the runway as lanterns flickered along the ground. When the wheels hit the earth, dust exploded behind him. The aircraft rolled to a stop. Ground crews rushed forward to pull the film, already eager to develop the intelligence that would shape tomorrow's assaults. Hale climbed out of the cockpit. His legs shook. His uniform was soaked in sweat. But he was smiling. Another day, another mission, another role played by the plane that did not know how to quit. Around him, the airfield grew quiet again. The engines fell silent, the mechanics rested, the jungle hummed. But in the hearts of the men who served there, one truth echoed like distant thunder. The P38 Lightning was always the first to rise, always the last to land, always the plane that never slept. And because of it, the war in the Pacific would never be the same.